as a pro se or a in propria persona litigant?
Well, what I wanted to do was complete what the sentence on this. While on the one hand there is such an office as the Judicial Fitness Commission, there isn't an office where we the people can find out what we want about judges without doing our own research and study. I've often suggested that some public institution ought to set itself up as a repository for judicial complaints. Any kind of public institution that would set itself up as a repository for judicial complaints, the way I envision that this thing would work would be to, of course, send in a complaint to the Judicial Fitness Commission, which generally doesn't go anywhere and is generally not available to the public for scrutiny and review later on. But if there was a place to send a copy of your complaint that, I'll just say that Office X, doesn't make any difference whose it is, then the public could go into this Office X and review the complaints on judges. And you would review the complaint and put the original complaint back into the file, the public file, and or maybe take home a copy. That way the public would have access to the complaints. And so there needs to be some public-minded, some public-spirited individual who would set themselves up as a repository for judicial complaints. That has not been done, and that would be my suggestion on that kind of an issue.
Well, that reminds me of when I was talking to this clerk at the Judicial Fitness Commission by phone. He said that 98% of the complaints against judges were dismissed, which means that you know, it could mean several things. Maybe people who were complaining didn't know enough about the law, or they didn't understand the case, or they weren't presenting the facts correctly, or something like that. But to have 98% of the, you know, maybe some people were just complaining because they lost, and then that's happens sometimes. But to me, to have 98% of the complaints against judges dismissed seems to be out of balance. Just out of balance.
The reason those complaints are dismissed is because the public doesn't follow through with them and they don't know what to do with them, and it's dismissed against themselves.
Well, in this case, in my case, the Judicial Fitness Commission prevented me from following through. They wouldn't allow me to come to the hearing.
Well, I don't have a solution. What solution? I've offered one. What do you have? I've said there needs to be a public repository.
Well, there is at least for attorneys, because the Oregon State Bar takes complaints on attorneys, and they have a record of the complaints against attorneys on file. And I don't know if they would accept and keep a record of complaints against judges. They might. I don't know.
Well, you're free to call the bar, but it's my understanding that they will not. I'm sure it's not the first time that question's been posed, but the bar is supposed to deal with attorneys, yes, but not necessarily those attorneys who are performing the function of judge, in the capacity of judge.
Well, when I go into court as a pro se litigant or an in propria persona, and I'm on my own, I feel like I'm, as far as the devoir at the bench, that I'm in the dark. All the lights are out, and I don't know what's going on in their biases and their minds.
Well, that's wait, but that's not the judge's fault. That is not the judge's fault. That's, in fact, what you're doing is you're playing right into the hands of the system as it's so designed. You're supposed to get an attorney, a member of the bar, to help you with that. That's why they exist. You're not, so if you feel like you're in the dark, that is either by your own choice or your own circumstance, which you're in the dark. And so what the judges would say to you is, get yourself an attorney.
Well, I don't mean as far as vocabulary or procedure go. What I'm talking about is as in relationship to the bias of that particular judge. On the judges, in front of the judge's bench, couldn't he put up a sign? The date, say like October the 4th, 1999, men 5%, women 95%, so that you'd know what the bias, what the odds were against you when you went into court?
I suppose that's a good way to put it, but it's not quite that simple, because suppose, you know, you're forcing me into a position. I'd like to give some other people an opportunity to talk here, but with that kind of a question, you're forcing me into a position, or anyone that you would ask that question of, is to either side one side or the other, and it's not quite that simple. There may be a disproportionate amount of mothers or fathers that have gone through that particular court in front of that particular judge that merit such an odd. However, you and I know most certainly I, would like to see some sort of 50-50 odds. And if in my lifetime, if those 50-50 odds ever showed up in court, I would think that, hooray, equality is here at last. But it probably won't show up in my lifetime, and maybe not in your lifetime. And I'm not real sure that we can pin the cause solely on judicial bias. That may be part of it, that is true, but also the way the cases come up, there may be not necessarily an equal number of fathers and mothers who deserve custody. So I don't know what you attribute that to. That's one of, judicial bias is one of them, that is true.
Well, if they can forecast the weather and you know what the weather's going to be before you go to work in the morning, why can't they do that for the judge before you go into court?
Okay, then let's see if there are some listeners out there, let's see if there are some viewers out there who have a comment on it, and let's get some others an opportunity to get their bias, their views, their prejudices right here on the air.
Okay, thanks, Victor.
Thank you.
Bye.
Let's see, do we have another call to take care of? We do, okay. Let's take care of another call, and we're talking about, well, right now, judges, because we opened up the program talking about a fellow in Montana, an attorney, Dana Christian, who filed a lawsuit against a judge, and perhaps you can do the same thing if you want to talk with your attorney, and if all the issues are just right, maybe it's appropriate. Let's take the next call. Hello, caller.
Hello. My name.
Got a question, comment?
Well, I have a question, and some comment, I suppose. I've had custody of my children for over 6 years. My ex-wife has had some dramatic mental problems, been physical with the children, the judge has been given many opportunities, and has even said so in chambers to my attorney to actually take the visitation away from my ex-wife, but he's unwilling to do that.
Hold on just a second, please. Vern, would you kick the audio up a little bit in here? I can barely hear him. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was just commenting on he was not, the judge is not willing to step up and take visitation away when the kids are clearly in a stressful and damaging situation, and he seems to state it in chambers, but when the outcome in court comes, he seems to always, well, in my opinion and many others' opinion, always have to give my ex-wife something to make it seem like she's getting something.
So what's the question?
Well, the question is, how do I go about changing that, or it's because, in my opinion, it's clearly biased. We have kids that are not in a good situation, and he won't act on a file that he has that gives him the opportunity to do such.
I don't know that I can give you a specific answer to something like that. Your question is fine, but it makes those of us who are unfamiliar with your case. Let me ask you a few questions. Let me show you what happens on my end.
Okay.
Do you work?
Yes.
What do you do?
I run a distribution center.
Does she work?
Yes.
And what does she do?
She's personally employed.
So what?
Yeah, she's employed by herself. She's an entrepreneur, which is the other question I had, is how do you bring financials out, because I have
what's happening here is the court is burdened with trying to make an equitable balance. Let me run through a couple of other things. How many kids you guys got?
2.
Okay, now there is a challenge for anyone hearing something like, you work, she works, you have 2 kids, there probably is a disproportionate ratio in your incomes and so on, right?
Well, on paper, but not realistically. She probably makes close to the same amount of money that I make, but she loses jobs or closes companies or does things like that before court.
The dilemma that anyone would have, whether it's someone sitting here on the other end of the television set or whether it's a judge in the courtroom, is how do you balance all of that out so that the children are provided for in the long run?
Right.
I've often suggested that fathers need to ask for custody of their children and do so in more and larger numbers.
Yeah, you didn't hear the first part of what I said.
I may not have.
I've had custody for 6 years. Ever since we separated, I've had custody of the children.
Okay, so
and she.
Then today, what is the issue?
The issue is that there's been circumstances that have arisen with physical violence toward the children and emotional violence toward the children, and that have many opportunities to remove the situation, remove the children.
You have custody of the kids, right?
I do.
And now you're bringing up the issue that there's domestic violence going on between mother and the kids?
We have been since the beginning, and it's documented. It's been documented, and it never. She comes in and brings different issues into court, and it always seems to get pushed to the back burner. And I mean, it's first and foremost.
How many years has this been going on?
Over 6, almost 7 years.
Why hasn't visitation been terminated?
It has with one child.
Well, then what is your question?
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's what I'm asking. I don't know why it hasn't. And that's why we go back to this bias issue that you brought up. Is there, what do I do? Because if I affidavit the judge, am I spreading the name around the courthouse that this guy's bad news? Or?
Well, there's only a couple of things that we can do. You're limited, first off. Do you have an attorney in this case with you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And have you asked for termination of visitation for this other child, the one remaining that has this relationship?
Many times.
All right. I don't have a solution. If you've made the request, and this is a cop-out answer, I'll accept that. I don't know all of the information about the case where I can give an answer. All you can do is ask through your attorney a motion to terminate the visitation for the benefit of the child. If it doesn't happen, you can appeal it, or you can go through the next election and maybe vote for another judge, or affidavit the judge, or do a judicial recall. There is no requirement that any judge jump up and down to your tune or my tune or something like that. We still have judges that are independent. You're putting me in the position of defending the judge, and where the judge doesn't need defending by me, but I don't know enough about it, and I don't have a better answer for you.
How about if the children are also saying, well, actually it's a child now.
How old are these kids?
One is a teenager and the other one is almost 10.
These kids can pretty much make up their own mind. And
okay.
I don't know that they're forced to go and do these things.
They are.
Well, if they didn't, what would happen?
Well, I would be in contempt, and
maybe it may take a contempt hearing to bring this issue to a head.
We've had many of those. We probably do that 2 or 3 times a year. Yeah, but not over this visitation issue.
And I'm going to confess that I don't have a better answer than where you are right now. I don't have a solution.
Okay. Do you have are you going to be giving a number where your office can be reached?
I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for calling. From time to time, I do get calls over the air, and I want to thank you guys for calling in with some of the questions. Some of these questions are very hard, very difficult, and I don't have answers to all of them. That's what we pay judges for. That's why we have courts. If you wish to call me, and sometimes it's difficult to get a hold of me, my number in Portland is 222-1111. There it is on the screen. That's 503-222-1111. By the way, I should take the time to share with you that Dads Against Discrimination is a charity, a non-profit tax-exempt charity, and we would like to be your charity of choice. So if you guys are ever considering a charity of choice, make sure that DADS has been given its due consideration.